What's going on, guys? My name is JKim Striker and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today I want to create a new type of content that has some historical information. Today we are going to talk about the Korean War and how it got to that point. But first of all, I want to give a huge shout out and credits to these channels because I got some important information from their videos. Really great channels, and I suggest you guys to check them out. The videos where I got these informations and their channels will be in the description down below. Also, shout out to those who commented on my last video. So shout out to you, Akira, which is Chloe, shout out Zawiya Magvitang, and shout out to Dressos, which is Andre. So without further ado, let's get straight into the discussion. This all started near the end of the 19th century or 1800s when Korea was still a tributary state of the Qing dynasty. Korea at that time was still called the Joseon dynasty. It had ruled over a united Korean peninsula for more than 500 years. Japan became a threat to the Qing dynasty because it has been rapidly industrializing. The Qing, on the other hand, failed to industrialize and has been in a slow decline. But 40 years earlier, Japan was like Korea, a tributary state to China or the Qing dynasty. It had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the United States forced Japan to open up. This started Japan's industrialization and started modernizing both its government and army. A conflict occurred between China and Japan called the First Sino-Japanese War from 1894 to 1895. This war caused Korea to become independent from China's Qing dynasty. China lost this war because of Japan's victorious modern army. Japan's victory caused the shift of the dominant power in East Asia from China to Japan. The independence of Korea in 1895 was thrust upon them by the Japanese, but this is an important year for the Koreans because Korea stopped being a Chinese tributary state isolated from the rest of the world, but it was surrounded by countries like Russia, China, and Japan that were far more powerful. Because of this, Korea decided to westernize and modernize. Korea also changed its name from the Joseon dynasty to the Korean Empire in 1897, and it seeked closer ties with Russia. Koreans decided to do this because Japan wanted to invade Korea. Both Japan and Russia wanted control over Korea, resulting in a war from 1904 to 1905 called Russo-Japanese War. Russia lost this war and Korea became a Japanese protectorate in the same year until 1910, where it was fully annexed and officially became a colony of Japan. The Japanese banned the Korean language, its traditions, and customs to replace it with Japanese ones. The Koreans were also forced to change their names to Japanese names. Labor was exploited and infrastructure was built to transport resources to Japan. The effect of Japan's occupation on Korea was so severe that after the occupation ended, the Koreans lacked almost all the administrative and technical expertise to run their own country. This is because the Japanese Empire used Japanese citizens to administer its colony, and this means that there were almost no Koreans left anymore who had experience running a country. Fast forward to the year 1945, where Japan was losing the war and it had to leave Korea. But while they were leaving, the Soviets were arriving. Korea was once again fought over by much more powerful and larger countries, the United States and the Soviet Union. They saw Korea as a strategic area in East Asia, and the USA was afraid that it would become a Soviet-occupied territory. Because of this, the US tasked David Dean Rusk and General Charles H. Bonesteel III to come up with a proposal on how to split Korea between the US and the Soviet Union. Without much knowledge of Korea and without consulting experts, they took a National Geographic map and decided that a line called the 38th parallel would be a good way to divide Korea, so each side would have approximately half of the Korean territory. The Soviets immediately agreed to this. The Americans were unaware that the Russians and the Japanese discussed sharing Korea along the exact same line. The split was only supposed to last for 5 years, where Korea would be turned back to the Koreans in a united state. This was the agreement of the Allies at the Moscow Conference in December 1945, that the Allies would take part in a trusteeship over Korea. But most Koreans wanted immediate independence from their occupiers, but their opinions were ignored. Both the USA and the USSR met several times to discuss how will Korea be united. The Soviets proposed that both sides withdraw and let the Korean people form their own government. This was rejected by the Americans. The US brought the problem to the United Nations, which declared that they should withdraw and let free elections be held. The Soviets boycotted this because they argued that the UN couldn't guarantee fair elections. In Pyongyang, the Soviets found a man named Cho Man-sik. Cho, along with most of the Koreans, saw the occupation of the USA and the USSR on the Korean peninsula as an attempt for foreign nationals to force their own ideologies on the Korean people rather than let the locals decide. The Soviets didn't like Cho's type of thinking, and as a result, they put him under house arrest before he later disappeared into the North Korean prison system. He was generally believed to have been executed soon after the start of the Korean War, possibly in October 1950. Another reason that the Soviets didn't like about him was because of his Christian faith. The Soviets were communist, and as communists, they hated religion. A new Soviet-aligned communist figure had to take Cho Man-sik's place in Northern Korea. This new figure was Kim Il-sung. His former name was Kim Song-ju, but it got changed to Kim Il-sung, which roughly translated to Kim become the sun. The Soviets often use these kind of names for the leaders of their aligned states. Kim was born in Korea but raised in Manchuria, a part of northern China. While in China, he became a communist guerrilla and fought the Japanese in Manchuria before joining the Soviet Red Army for training towards the end of World War II. A provisional government in the north was also established by the USSR in 1946 under Kim Il-sung's leadership. Meanwhile, the United States governed the southern part of Korea for 3 years. There was a provisional government in exile in China, and they sent a delegation to the US-occupied force. But the US general in charge refused to meet them, recognize them, and outlawed this Korean government on December 12, 1945. The US government in Korea was also met with resistance in 1946 when Koreans started rebelling against the US presence in the country. And it was also because of the trusteeship that the US and USSR agreed on. Rebellions like the Jeju Uprising, where the government killed rebels, protesters, and suspected communist sympathizers in the island of Jeju from April 3, 1948 to May 13, 1949. At least 100,000 suspected communist citizens were killed in the summer of 1950 alone, and there were secret mass graves covered up by the South Korean regime. There was also purges, executions, and killings that happened in the north, and because of this, Japanese collaborators, pro-democracy Koreans, and Christians fled to the southern part of Korea. Meanwhile, in the south, an election in 1948 took place, resulting in Syngman Rhee becoming the first president of South Korea. Syngman Rhee was also the first president of the now outlawed Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea and was a former lobbyist in the United States. He won the election because of his popularity, and he was an anti-communist figure, but it doesn't mean that he was a Democrat, but also authoritarian like Kim Il-sung, because he began a nationwide purge of suspected communists in the South. In 1948, two governments were established on both sides of the Korean peninsula. In the north, the communists established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In the south, An anti-communist regime was also established called the Republic of Korea. The Americans, meanwhile, seeing their mission accomplished, began leaving South Korea.